Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Nice to see everyone's faces. We're still growing here. So, welcome to the Stoa. Today I am your host. The Stoa is a place to cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the blade's edge of the moment. So, just a little check-in about where I'm at today. Yesterday I had a very difficult day. I woke up and I watched the new movie, The Planet of the Humans. Has anybody watched that? And um, I realized that I must have been at a low point. I didn't have a lot of resources to watch it. Usually I can maintain a certain amount of empathic distance. Yeah, so that film really affected me, and I was fortunate to have 4 community calls yesterday where we helped each other, or the community helped me kind of process that. So there's a little bit of, I think, that hangover for me today, and we'll see if that weaves into um, what we are going to do today. So we've started this series last week about a new way of thinking, a new way of trying to think through the weeds and get very clear. One of the things that's happening in a lot of our information ecology is that, it's really crazy. So how can we step back, start thinking from first principles and go forward? So we did a metaphysical exercise just to get to the bones of this way of thinking last week. And if you weren't here last week, it doesn't matter. You'll get the sense of it with a new exercise. It turns out that the closer you get to actually, we derived the universe last week. That actually happens to be easier than thinking about real issues. So the closer we get to actual lived experience, the more nuanced, the more difficult it is to uh, um, cut through the weeds, or to find, weed seeds that are actually very useful. So we also talked about how when we think in these ways, we're building something what I call a cognitive widget. So the cognitive widget for the universe had those 3 parts. There needed to be some process, there need to be self-differentiation, and then participation. And today and the next week, we're going to work with cognitive widgets. The cognitive widgets: trust, power, and something I called action threshold. Um, and this is the cognitive widget for self-organized collective work, right? So we know for a team to get together, there has to be some kind of trust. There has to be some kind of, there's a negotiation of power and roles and who gets to do what. And then there's action thresholds. You might work as on consensus. Consensus is a very high action threshold. If you need everyone to agree, if you have a lot of trust in the system, then you can have people making decisions on their own. The action thresholds go down. So we want to look at, so why is this important? Because we suspect that as we try to move to decentralized society, as we try to build emerging cultures from, micro solidarities, from these little, we need to kind of reassess what it is to be in a human collective, because our habits are conditioned by the institutions that we've been raised in. Right? So we're trying to get back to a source code and build from there, trying to get down to first principle thinking around these things. So that's why the exercise hopefully will matter. So today we're going to start with trust. And I'm just going to show you this. Actually, maybe I could do it right here. Um, you need a piece of paper, and you're going to just draw out something. Mm, yeah, so let me do another one. That's one. Okay, here. Sorry about this. I had it set up and now I don't have it. So. Okay, so you want to draw something that looks like this. Share. So can you see this here? And basically, you're just drawing you're drawing some concentric circles, and the dot in the middle is you. And then the people in the circle next closest to you are people who you trust the most. And the people in the next circle are people who don't quite make this inner sanctum. And the people out here, I mean, some people have many, many layers. I just usually represent it with the 3. The people out here are people that you trust, but you actually don't know. Right? So they're kind of in a different zone, right? You're going to find that there's different mechanisms. So, you don't have to put these little guys there, but you just need to have, you're in the middle. These are the people you trust the most. And we're going to write out some categories about this. These are the people that, for some reason, I mean, you trust them, but you just know there's a difference. There's a boundary, some kind of boundary. You might have another layer of that. That's fine. You can do as many layers that you need to represent your internal compass. This is your what we would call a trust network. But then you want one out here, which are people you don't know that for some reason you feel you trust. And what I mean by people you don't know could be people like me, but it also could be people like, I trust, which I don't, Bill Gates or something like that. I trust Madonna or Lady Gaga, or something like that. So they're more symbolic in your trust network than they are, you haven't actually engaged with them. So you just want to take a few moments and build out your trust. Now, one of the things about this is you're not measuring if people are trustworthy. This is not about the people. You're like what trust is trust is an emergent pattern that emanates from you through your many, many, many micro relationships in ordinary everyday life. It shapes itself. So, sometimes you can have an experience that I trust somebody really well and they really trust that person, but I don't trust that person. So obviously it's not whether this person is trustworthy. This is not it's not a judgment like that. We just want to illustrate that there's an emergent pattern that is a natural part of being a human being. Yeah, there's some symbolic, deep symbolic trusting that we have in our society.
We are just writing names. Is that correct?
Yes, you could put initials, just so you could, because if we make it specific, then you get more information out of the exercise. And of course, notice that you're trusting your body. Some of you might actually know that's not true. Some of you might be more of a conceptual exercise, but there's some compass that is evaluating these uh, these levels. That's what we're after. We're after what is this compass?
Bonnitta.
Yes.
Does it, yeah, someone mentioned in the chat, trust in what context? And I'm also wondering now, I'm coming
Okay.
across people as I think like someone I trust to honor and respect me, but I know that their information is going to be bunk.
This is what we're going to talk about. That
Okay.
there's multiple contexts. So just put down, so what you're going to use the lines for is to kind of, we don't have to do that alone, but we're going to try to figure out whether you have just one context or you have multiple contexts. Like, and this is exactly what we're going to learn. There's a lot going on, right? There's a lot going on. Um, and for some people, there's not a lot. Some people have very strong um, couple of principles, and that's their reality too. So um, this is what we're going to talk about as a group, because we think trust is a thing, or you know coaches teach it, and there's just so much going on, and you have to be careful not to teach what you think trust is. I did this once. The first time I did it was in Berlin, outside of Berlin, and we didn't we didn't even start the exercise, and someone said, "Well, that's easy. The family's in the middle, and the other people are on the other side." And someone said, "None of my family makes the middle circle." So there's a lot going on in the human condition. So start to write. Those of you that are noticing context, start to write out some of the context that you see your sliding context, depending upon you're thinking about someone who has the keys to the office versus somebody else in a different situation. Okay, so I'm just going to share the diagram again. Somebody hadn't seen it. Do you see the diagram now? It's really just concentric circles. You're here in the middle. This is your inner trust sanctum, your 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 closest trust zone. Then other people you trust. Notice how you make this boundary. What's happening here? Notice context. So these are all maybe people you trust, but they're trusted in different contexts. And then these are people that you trust, but you don't know. So they're really um, function more symbolically. Like someone said, I trust Keanu Reeves, and I get it, like you get it, right? Because he took the right pill. Was I forget which color the right one, the correct pill was, but um, yeah. Okay, so now we're going to open it up for some discussion. Some people, for example, realize they're in a very strange situation that they have more trust with more people they don't know than the people they actually know. This is a very precarious way to live your life.
Does it always have to be people? Or you might say have trust in a particular scientific principle or nature or something of that nature?
This is people. That's an interesting question.
I was thinking the same thing about institutions or collections of people. It gets to be an interesting edge case.
Yeah, so there's a version of this diagram where what you do is you can so if you know, like you trust this whole, there's 12 people in this company, you trust them all, you can just put them 12 at this company. Do you know what I'm saying? But if you like trust the whole institution, then that has to be in the outside because you don't actually participate. It has a little bit more of a symbolic function. There may be a noticing in here of how skewed we are to trust institutions and organizations, and maybe how small our person-to-person trust network is. I mean, if I'm reflecting on my own experience, I see, like, if there was just a boundary, institutions, authorities, science, I trust them, and then people, I see a whole lot more on the other side. And this is an interesting phenomenon also. Yes, so if you trust a book or an author, that also would be in the symbolic category.
Yeah, I'm noticing that there's people that, particularly people that are close to me, that you know, I go, oh yeah, sometimes I really trust that person, and sometimes, or trust their thinking, and then other times not. It depends on what's happening in the dynamic and yeah, the mindset.
Yeah, it's not static, right? These things, it's like watching the COVID statistics. You know, the US is on the bottom and China's on the top, and then Italy's up, and then, you know, it's like that, right? I mean, this is a porous network. And of course, happening on the other side of the equation also, right? So this is the complexity of human collective participation.
Yeah, I'm part of a independent facilitation or person-centered facilitation movement. And I work with people with developmental disabilities, and we use this tool. And we're following who they put in those circles, like who they think are closest to them. And sometimes, yeah, it isn't their mom or the person who's closest to them, and that's who sits in their circle.
Yeah, this is interesting for young children. If their parents aren't in their inner circle, that could be a flag.
Mm-hmm.
Bonnitta,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any, like, a question that you sort of ask yourself to determine who gets to be in your, like, a hypothetical situation or something like that?
Say a little more.
Like when I think about who I trust the most, or who has to reach, who gets to be on the innermost circle, I kind of go through or feel through my body with different situations that I place these people in. Like, for example, would I don't know, marry my daughter to them or something like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you can use prompts to get a read in your body, you know?
Yeah.
And then like so I'll just start populating, but please share some of your context. Like some people notice that they trust people who are because they're predictable. Then other people say, well, I get that. There's some people on my trust that I trust because they're predictable. But I really trust my sister, and she's like out of control. Like literally, she's like a loose cannon. So then it is like, okay, so now you have predictability, that's a certain compass. And then you have this other thing that's happening that may be because of family or a relationship where you've been through a lot or something. Some people, especially a lot of people in organizations, predictability is very big part of their compass. They can almost be one-dimensional about that. And so what we will look at is if that is actually someone who lives in a very low trust environment. If you trust based mostly on predictability, you're actually living in a very low trust environment. It's like when you first, have your boyfriend and you have to call each other every 5 minutes, right? This is actually a low trust environment. So.
Bonnitta, I'm noticing as I think more and more about context that different people are in different circles depending on context, right? And so, I've got the same name popping up in different circles as I think about them in different contexts. I might trust their decision making, but I wouldn't necessarily trust them to be particularly reliable. I might trust them to be capable, but not necessarily great on the decision. Do you know what I mean? There's so many, as you've already said, there's so many dimensions to this that people keep jumping in and out of particular circles. I'm finding it a little bit confusing now that I'm really starting to think about it. I'm starting to find it really confusing.
Does anyone have a different experience?
I've noticed that my circle and the different contexts actually forms a bit of a continuum. With the people that are on my inner circle, it's kind of like the flavor is people that I trust care for me. And it's like that deep interpersonal trust, versus as I expand outwards, it goes into, I don't think they care about me, but I really trust like their domain specific knowledge. And so I trust them in a more limited capacity. And the people that are in between are actually in between those two feelings.
Ah, very nice. Yeah.
One thing that comes up for me that's really interesting is I have a deep circling practice that I've had for several years. And so that what Eric was mentioning about the context is apparent for me, but it actually shows assumptions that I have running all the time. When something shows up where I notice that there seems to be a conflict or a sudden disparity, my curiosity goes to what assumption had that show up and what that changes. And an example of something that the people that I don't know that I trust are drivers on the road. It's clear that I'm driving and trusting a lot of people to follow this, but if I see somebody doing something that suddenly challenges the trust, I can quickly reassess the situation. So there's something of what Viveki talks about with relevance realization and salience landscape that is affecting this trust where it's running on kind of autopilot, and suddenly, wait a minute, I actually do need to do some manual processing to see what's alive here in the context that makes me change my opinion.
Yeah. So this is a very important insight that you're bringing up here that we want everyone to pay attention to. We experience breaking trust or the anxiety around lack of trust a billion times more than all the ways in which trust is operating in our lives. And it's actually, we need to train ourselves to experience the enormous amount of trust that is part of our lived reality every day. Because we are becoming hyper vigilant, hyper judgmental. I mean, you know, if you trust based upon whether I make the right decision, or this or that, and I'm trusting you for the same reason, you're building psychotic individuals. You're basically making each other rats in a cage of whether you're going to get a shock or not. This is how our system actually works. So we need to counteract that by making salient, maybe that's what you were saying, all the ways in which, the simple ways in which trust grounds our collective, you know, they tend to be simple ways. And also, you know, you trust that the power companies out there fixing the power, there's so much giving for you, giving for us. There's so many reasons to trust. You won't see this on social media. It doesn't make it. But making that salient is part of recovery in our world. There's a experiment done by Carl Weick, who wrote he's like the founder of sense making in organizations. And what they experience, what I'm not going to get it exactly right, but they researched relationships in organizations, and they saw that at every time you build trust, that becomes the baseline expectation, right? So maybe it took you a long time to have this level of trust, but now this becomes the baseline of which, if someone moves out of it, then you lose trust. You no longer experience what you experienced as trust before, because it's not, you now have a different baseline. And it showed that there's a natural erosion of trust in relationships over time that we have to work uphill against.
I'd like to comment on that. I just remembered something that is kind of a part of my experience, that it is helpful to actually have some breaking of the trust and then rebuilding it, in terms of it seems like I can trust a person more if we failed at some point and then reestablish the trust. Unlike with a person where it seems just there's everything going well, because sometimes it seems like it's a more shocking thing to have that suddenly break, rather than with a person who just seems kind of more volatile for me, but able to kind of reestablish the connection. So it's like maybe that's relating to that there's not a formation of such a strong expectation of a baseline, because I do expect that, well, with that person, it's valuable, it's possible to trust, but it's also somehow requiring more patience from my side, and therefore I'm not so fixated on expecting them to be a certain way and trusting them in each and every case.
Yeah, so this is also another good insight. So in the animal kingdom, in all pro-social mammals, the collective constantly tests boundaries to build increasing trust. So we tend to see it as like deviant behavior, but it is actually a mechanism for increasing trust. But as humans, we have made, we misunderstand what trust is. It's something that, you know, is a line, or it's broken, or whatever, predictability or some kind of guaranteed assurance. We think trust is like the dollar, you know? It can't be, it's either real or it's not. When trust is it's a living dynamic system that we can learn how to expand our trust network. And we need this skill in order to build a new society. People who understand, just as you said, that breaking trust, having a situation where you see where the fragility of the trust is a way then to increase that trust, increase that relationship, to understand that relationship more, to have some insight into yourself. And in general, we're taught, from very early on, don't trust that person, or, one strike and you're out.
Bonnitta, what's coming up for me is that the people closest to my circle were people who distrusted me in the right way.
Say a little more, like some contexts.
So people who don't just gobble up anything I spit out and call me out on my bullshit when they see it, but in a loving way. So I'm not walking into that relationship expecting them to just kind of give me everything I want.
Yeah. So we can like parents need to learn how to build trust in their children, and it has to do with wiggle room. The more trustworthy you are, the more agency you're given, right? So do you give your 16-year-old son the keys to the car? Well, there's a dialogue in a relationship, and there's trust that he may make a mistake. Does that destroy trust? How do you constantly build character between both of you, because you're building your own character too as a parent, and to understand this dynamic that happens.
I feel like there's something Rhea Buck said 2 days ago about falling in love with potential. And when I feel like someone is lovingly, as you said, Peter, holding my potential, my learning process, then yeah, it's like they might show me, reflect back my patterns, that are getting in my way and in the way of that potential.
Yeah. So
yeah.
How many people have in your trust network someone that you trust so much that, not in everyday ordinary situations, but you will believe them despite the fact you cannot see what they see? Right. So this is kind of like a spiritual friend. It's like a lot of times it's our partners, and you'll say, at first you fight back and you push back, and then it gets like, no, I'm telling you, you can't see it, but I'm telling you. And at a certain point, you realize you can't see it, but the other person literally sees something you can't see, and you trust them. This is also a very important part of being multi-perspectival in a group, because you have many different perspectives, and we churn them to see which ones are valuable, which ones maybe have more holes in them. But at a certain point, you're not going to be able to see or enter into the experience that everyone has. And you have to trust it. You have to trust something in your felt sense gives you that trust.
Bonnitta,
Bonnitta, sorry.
I was just going to say that I noticed that the people that I would want to say that I trust the most actually get to spend comparatively little time with, and I work a 9 to 5, so the people that I work with, I trust in toward the edges of the people that I know, and I wonder if you could comment on like whether or not there's like such a thing as performative trust, like if I should recognize that I actually trust those people more, or if I should recognize that I actually don't get to spend very much time with the people that I trust the most.
Well, I think that's common. It's not true for everyone. You know, when I first started doing these in organizations, I really thought there'd be a handful of ways people experience trust, and there's literally, lots. But this, what you described, is very familiar to me, and it seems to be the case for some people. This is the case, and it seems to be something like the people you trust the most become some kind of ground. They withdraw. They are who you are. There's some kind of complete integration. I once said to my partner, we were kind of, it was a difficult time, but it was like, then we're like, well, then why are we together or something, like bottom line it. And I'm like, well, it's like you're my left arm. I don't pay much attention to it, but it'd be like cutting off my left arm. And so there is something that happens where, of course, there is also the potential of just avoiding, ignoring, or pretending. But there is something where like, this person's always there and they know you're always there. But it anchors the possibility for you both to take that and expand trust in a larger group, which requires more participation. There's something really interesting in this because for like the great apes, they trust each other because they'll lose their trust connection if they're not grooming each other. They require touch to maintain these bonds. I don't think it's as exactly that as the literature does, but in general, there's a lot of behaviors that have to be maintained to keep a band of the apes together. So much so that, for example, there's not a lot of crossover in terms of like, if you take like the cats have interesting social groups, but if you take a female cat that, had babies and is part of this family, and you bring it out of the territory for a while, when it comes back into the territory, it's not recognized, right? So, but humans have this ability to do exactly what you said, which I think is it's like a superpower, really, if you think about it. It's like the ability to feel anchored in community despite there's no evidence to that. And sometimes you meet people that you haven't seen in 5 years, it's just you take off where you left off. There's something, sometimes you don't even really like them anymore. Like, wow, he got married and he's doing that. But there's this point at which, if you were down and out and vice versa, there's, without a question, there's community there, And I don't know if other, like elephants might do some of this, some of these, but in general, this is a human superpower.
Do you think that ability to sort of diffuse or elongate trust like that could give us an opportunity to, instead of diffusing trust out from our inner circle into people we don't know as well, or into institutions, and then losing the overall amount of trust in our life, that could give us an opportunity to do both the diffusing and kind of double down on the people that we're close to, or create more close relationships, and thus have like more overall trust in our lives.
Yeah. Now you see, it's very interesting because why this is different than other models and what we're, this excellent conversation. So the old structure was like you trust your family, or Confucianism. You trust your family, and that's a circle inside this other circle, and that's a circle inside of this other circle. And when we do this exercise, we see there's something more interesting going on. They're not just concentric circles, right? They're like, I'm at work now, I'm inside of this circle, and the people I really trust are somehow the background. And then I'm over here. This is a much more fluid, has a lot more potential to build a very deep web of trust in society, but it's more complex, right? It's why we have to like look at it and think about it. So what's interesting is to spend some time going about your ordinary life and think about, oh, now in this context, I'm the dot in the middle, and there's this trust pattern that's emerging around me, and about everyone else too, ripples within ripples, and those ripples are interacting in certain ways. And then, really be conscious about that this is a skill that we need to practice.
The question that's coming up for me is like, I'm seeing that based on where I'm at, I think in my emotional development, it changes. Like I'm in a period where one of the things that's really important to me is emotional safety. Can I trust that whatever I bring to you, you're not going to judge me for? But there's been other times in my life when that hasn't been the case, and I can see that it's starting to change. It's like I want you to challenge me more. So it's kind of, as you're emotionally moving through developmental stages, what you prioritize changes in terms of trust.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you become more conscious, you're certainly conscious that depends upon what state I'm in, right? And of course, this is why we put the people in the middle, because we're not saying people are more or less trustworthy. It's just how this ripples is emanating from us. But one of the things you can do is consciously think of what your trust network feels like when you're in a stable state. And then don't give up on it when your state changes. So like, the movie A Beautiful Mind is about this mathematician who could see patterns, but then he got to see patterns everywhere because he was kind of crazy. And they wanted to put him on medication or something. And do you remember how it ends? His wife says, how can you use your mind to watch your mind? Because your mind is the thing that changes states and becomes paranoid. So what does he do? He uses her mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So this is the power of trust, that when you're moving in and out, you don't need, it's not about quantity, but if you, and I'm sure this is what you do, but when you have this conceptual understanding in your stable state of what is trust, your trust network, then you can know that you feel disoriented, but keep some kind of intact environment. Keep yourself in place inside that trust network. You know, it's a power of visualization. You know, we're going to rely on the conceptual map we made before we kind of got disoriented. Okay, say more about this, Sean. This is an interesting.
Right, one final question on that.
Oh.
So when you say that, you know, you're sort of observing yourself as a pattern and you try to build a somatic sense for what does your trust network feel like, I feel like that destabilization might have its own purpose. So if you are moving away from being stable to unstable, it's potentially due to some sort of a interaction with someone in your trust network. So there's a sort of reorientation of the entire map. So trying to hold on to that previous somatic sense of the network might be misleading, would it not?
Yeah. So this is the other side of the coin. You know, the movie, The Planet of the Humans, just shows how so much of the Green New Deal is just an illusion. You know, and so you have this environmentalist doing some research, and it's like he can't trust anyone. You know, like it just goes boom, boom. I mean, I was pretty much a skeptic anyways. This thing blew my mind, how deep the irony, let's say, goes. So we don't want to be naive. We want to build a certain capacity because there might be a worm in your trust network, right? And so this is a funny thing. I don't know if any of you have been in this experience, but you might be like I was in an organization, did a startup, turned into a large landscape firm, but it was the owner had a small company, and anyways, it was one of these companies where it was started with this woman. She was the bookkeeper forever, and you know she had all the power because she just, when you're a small company, the owners don't know really, they don't look at the books and this and that. And I knew that she was crooked, but she was such a nice person, and she was always bringing in lunches and all this stuff, you know, like so people think you're crazy. They literally think you're crazy because you have this intuition that this person is not trustworthy. I mean, this has happened many times in my life. I mean, she ended up killing her husband when, you know, when we started to realize she was extorting money. But it's like when the trust in the system is built on an illusion, this is a kind of a crazy. The collective can become, you know, it can drive you crazy, and marginalized people have this problem. They can see that people are lying, and they appear to be crazy, and they actually start getting crazy because what's self-evident to them, yeah, people trust people where other people can see it's self-evident that this is just a predator, really, you know. So was that something you were
Yeah,
talking about? Yeah.
I would like to add a moment to that. Specifically how kind of stigmatization of anger and similar expressions could be contributing to that, because I think very often people even resort to kind of angering others in order to gain more honesty, because it's kind of more difficult to fake stuff while being angry. So it's kind of a litmus test. If you can say things in a very kind of angry way, it's more reliable. And when anger and aggression are stigmatized, not that they should be accepted, but it's like it's a kind of a no-go zone altogether, then this also becomes like kind of a less actionable way of checking, because if you're angry with your honesty, it's also somehow already bad that you are angry, that you're expressing it in somewhat aggressive way. And I think there should be space for that. But if everything is so PC in our cultures that it's no longer possible to just be angry, you're kind of dismissed then. And then what would actually help as a kind of a sign of you sharing honestly something that is really important to you kind of is lost.
Exactly. And the more the more trust in the relationship, the more energy it can tolerate without breaking. And so then you start to build like these fantastic capacities in small teams. I haven't seen it in large teams, but you know, one of the things that erodes trust is pretending, you know, this surface way of relating. And a lot of people think they're doing it so that to preserve trust, you know, oh my God, and then, you know, but this actually, we have a, you know, it signals to the collective that the trust is really very fragile and weak or non-existent. And many people work at this level, you know, all day, every day, this level of fake trust. It's semantic. Uh, there's implicit social rules of what you say or don't say. Nobody talks about it, but some things are sanctioned and some are not, you know, and all these kind of underlying games are very low trust environments.
You know, what's coming to mind is I'm doing check-ins at each time at the start of these sessions just to say my emotional state. And then when people are asking me, how am I doing right now? I just want to tell them how I'm doing. I don't want to say good, right? Because it's like, that is like the prison right there, is just saying good.
Yeah. Yeah, someone's just reflecting back about how there is, this is something that's in our society. You know, there's some the erosion of trust in our society and the relationship to mental health is a big deal. Um, um, as a Taoist, we say, it's a cop out, okay? But when you're a Taoist, you look at everything that doesn't make sense, all the cognitive dissonance, and then you remind yourself, despite all the evidence to the contrary, the Tao is not broken, right? So this is a kind of mythopoetic move, but um, this is what we're trying to build. And it reminds me of that anchoring. The people that you don't maybe spend a lot of time with, you spend a lot of time in the world that needs a lot of help for trust, but you still can come from a place of wholeness because you're held by this small, intimate group. There's something that's always there. You know, and we can go on and on. I know some of you people are part of Game B. Game B has serious trust problems, serious, and it's not really addressed. You're not going to be able
Can you say
to.
more about
There's a lot of secrets. There's a lot of performative contradictions when people are online and offline. There's a lot of like, there are a lot of breaches where the whole thing breaks down. There's a lot of proprietary information that people hold pieces that's not circulated. This is done strategically. The feeling that relationships are being strategized is a low trust environment. I'm not saying that anyone's doing anything wrong. I'm just saying if you can be members of groups which are important, but to notice that you're certainly not capable of doing very complex tasks together because the trust environment is very low.
Could you say a bit about this in relation to what Zach Stein says about like teacherly authority? Like if someone says, hey, in my developmental process, I have gaps in my self-trust. Who can teach me how to trust myself? But then they are saying that like, I don't know how to find a teacher that I trust. And that gets very complex.
Yeah. So trust, teaching trust or mentoring trust is interesting. It's different than this, what we're doing. Because to teach or mentor trust, you just have to trust. Full stop. And you're not even naive. You know that you lend money, you're not getting it back. But to mentor and teach trust, you just have to trust, full stop.
Wait, can you give me an example of that?
Yes. So the only person that I've actually had this amazing experience with is, do you know Soryu? He runs the Maple. He says, my job is to love you. That's it. And that, of course, he didn't use the word trust, but it's just a simple phrase. But when this really lands. So this is not someone who has the same kind of trust network we're talking about, right? This is just something beyond that. So I think there's a lot of fragility in the work we do, including myself and Zach. We're not there yet, like it's very, I was on a work group with him and we were talking about, my question was, can the modern mind, I mean our minds, actually separate interiors from exteriors? Can we actually separate the spin around COVID from what is actually real? And I don't think we can. So these are psychotic tendencies in the modern collective that makes trust not that stable, and we're just being honest. So this is just trying to be honest about this. So so part of what he's writing about is also coming from that place. He's reflecting that back on. So if you have, for example, teacherly authority, I have to be able to make a case that this is real and that's not real. I have to make a case for whether vaccines are good or not, or any of these things. And it's not possible to make that case right now. So then you could say, Bruno Latour said that truth is going to be anchored in trust, not like scientific validity. So that you will trust you will believe what is true based upon the trust networks you have built, which brings us back to the exercise. That and of course, many of you did notice that you believed the laws of nature. You believe, there's this independent, objective truth that you trust, but these lines are starting to blur. And it seems that, and Latour talks about the root word for truth is troth, which means trust. So they're very close. They're very, very close. We trust the laws of nature because they apply to predictable things. But now we're asking questions about nature that have no predictable answers. What's the relationship between trust and truth in those situations? So this is all part of, so this was just trying to get at, the source code of trust. As we discovered last time, it's not a conceptual activity. Somehow we're using our body as the abstractor of the essential elements, so the essential core meaning, right? It is conceptual, obviously, but unlike conceptual reductionism, or we're doing what I call source code work, which is always the body is part of getting to the protocol.
Bonita,
Yep.
just being cognizant of the time, and
Yep.
I'd to
I'm
share.
trying to wrap it up.
I'd like to share a couple of things that were happening in the chat. I've been messaging people privately. So yeah, a story that happened yesterday. Rhea, who does the oxytocin parties on Sunday, she Zoomed me and my wife in, and she started crying in front of us. And then me and my wife just started crying with her. And then, you know, the connection there and the trust just was built. And I know Narayan here, he has something on like the sob squad. I don't know what they do, but they cry together. And so I'd like him to come in to do a session there. And then Tyson messaged me that we should have a trust gym. Maybe where we can do these activities where we just like, you know, find our way to each other's hearts without, you know, getting too abstract. So yeah, those are insights that came forth for me from this session. So I think that was pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. So I'll hand it over to you for final thoughts, and then maybe I can close with upcoming events.
Yeah, I'll just ping off of that. So we do very similar things with the horse workshops, as people here on the call can attest to. I mean, basically, there's something about horses and being in nature that opens your heart, and then people cry, and then there's this really beautiful consequence of building the human system, but also extending that to the natural system, which is really powerful. When we did this trust network thing, when you are feeling into your felt sense, you're tapping into some of those, you know, you're tapping into the way that our affect system organizes reality for us. And I think the reason why we cry is because we're pretty much always repressing or suppressing that component of our primitive mind. It's actually quite complex mind, and then like the energy gets built up. So that's a whole nother conversation. So yeah, it's time to move on. We'll try to do power next week. So we did trust this week, and then of course we have to talk about power. Yeah, we're trying to build skills and capacities to think collectively. And you want to talk about what's going on coming up?
Yeah, I'll talk about upcoming events. So if you go to the stoa.ca, we have an event coming up at, was it an hour? Let's see, 12 p.m. Eastern time, collective presencing by Ria Bach. So we're actually going to practice her collective presencing practice. So definitely check out that. My favorite trickster, Alexander Bard, is coming in at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, swimming in the digital during a pandemic. And then tonight, then we have Socratic speed dating with Raven Connolly. So it's like the speed dating method with the Socratic inquiry. And that's at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we're ending up the night with a big party, a Stoic meaning wave with Akira the Dawn. Oh, that cannot be missed. He's going to come in and drop some Stoic beats. So please check that out if you're interested. And
remember, the Stoa runs on the gift economy, and you are now part of the gift economy. And we hope that you find value and can contribute in any way that you can.
And thank you, Bonnitta, for giving your gift today.
Thank you all for coming. It was, you know, you could go, I've done these whole day workshops on this, so just give you a taste of it. But hopefully it was powerful and meaningful to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.